You speak to me as if France was still a colonial power, but I do not want to take care of electricity problems in the universities of Burkina Faso. That's his job. That's the job of the president. So on the other hand, I reassure you. Oh, what's this? He's going away. Stay there. Maybe he's off to repair the air conditioning.
The man you see walking away in that video is Christian Kaboré, Burkina Faso's former president. He was the first civilian leader in the country's history, a president with no ties to the military. But now, imagine this, another president from a foreign country mocking him in front of Burkina students, publicly, on record. It's hard to picture the humiliation he must have felt, but this short clip is more than an embarrassing moment. It's a warning to every African leader who has chosen to be a puppet, who bows to the demands of the West, who serves foreign interests instead of their own people. Because here's the truth, the West does not respect them, not even a little. To the West, puppet leaders are tools, used, then thrown away. History has shown this over and over again. Leaders who were supported by the West, leaders who were even helped into power by Western hands, have been betrayed and removed when they were no longer useful. And Christian Kaboré, he is a perfect example of this cycle. After Emmanuel Macron became president of France in 2017, he began a tour across Francophone Africa, moving from country to country as if Africans had elected him. But should anyone be surprised? To France, Africa has always been more than a former colony. It's their backyard, their territory in everything but name. So, Macron arrived in Burkina Faso. In the capital city, Ouagadougou, he met with students. The room was filled with young, hopeful faces. And sitting among them was the former president of Burkina Faso, Christian Kaboré. Macron came with a message, a promise even. He said he wanted to end Francafrique, the system France created decades ago to keep control over its former colonies. A system Africans had grown to hate, and Macron knew it. Standing before those students, he tried to sound different from the leaders before him. I am from a generation for whom Nelson Mandela's victory is one of the best political memories, he said. I am from a generation that doesn't come to tell Africans what to do. It sounded good, too good. But the students weren't fooled. They knew France's grip on their society was as strong as ever, even from thousands of miles away. The conversation continued, calm, respectful, until one student raised his hand. He asked Macron a simple question, an innocent one, at least on the surface. At that time, Macron was scheduled to launch a solar power farm in Burkina Faso. Everyone in that room knew it, and that one question would change the entire tone of the meeting. Then it happened. One student raised his hand and asked a simple question. What will you do about Burkina Faso's constant power cuts? It was an honest question. Director, but Macron's response shocked the room. You speak to me like I'm a colonial power, he said. I don't want to look after electricity in Burkina Faso. That's the job of your president. Technically, Macron was right. It wasn't his responsibility to fix Burkina Faso's electricity problems. But the way he said it, sharp, cold, and in public, sent a different message. He could have been diplomatic. He could have avoided embarrassing a leader who was supposedly his ally. But he didn't. And then, things got worse. The students roared with laughter. Even Kaboré smiled, but it wasn't joy. It was humiliation disguised as grace. A few moments later, the former president quietly stood up and walked out of the room. For some reason, Macron decided to make a joke. Perhaps he has gone to fix the air conditioning, he said, in a tone that dripped with condescension. Was that necessary? Or was it a glimpse into what France truly thinks of African leaders? The Burkina president returned a few minutes later smiling while his aides claimed he had only stepped out for a bathroom break. But the truth was obvious. He was embarrassed. That single moment destroyed Macron's so-called chance of ending Francafrique. Africans didn't take it lightly. Social media exploded. Photoshopped images of Macron started circulating, placing him on the cover of the infamous Tintin in the Congo comic book. One user wrote, "It's been an hour since the big white chief arrived to provide lessons and orders to the savage blacks, but at the same time, without telling Africa what it has to do." Another added, "Wow, Macron, on an official visit, tells the president of Burkina Faso he is only fit to fix air conditioning. Racism writ large." Macron tried to fix the damage by saying it was just a joke. But here's the thing. We've never seen him joke with any Western leader like that. Never. In a way, the Burkina Faso president brought this on himself. If Burkina Faso didn't have electricity problems, no one would have asked that question. That student spoke up because leaders like him have failed their own people. They've neglected basic responsibilities like providing power, healthcare, and education. Instead, they choose dependency. And that's the bigger issue. Puppet leaders, those who bend to the West without question, command no respect. Not from their people, not from foreign powers. To the West, they are disposable, easy to humiliate, easy to mock, and history proves it. We all remember that moment, the day South African President Cyril Ramaphosa flew to Washington to explain himself to Donald Trump. But why? Why would the president of a sovereign African nation feel the need to justify his decisions to another country? The United States would never do the same for Africa. Never. And yet, Ramaphosa went. He sat across from Trump, hoping to smooth things over, hoping to prove something. But what he got instead was humiliation. Trump embarrassed him publicly, reducing that meeting to nothing. All that effort for nothing. When will African leaders learn? Why do they keep shrinking before the white man? Why do they believe that being pro-West is the only path to success? And after all these decades of loyalty, what has Africa truly gained? These are the questions no one seems willing to answer. Now, back to Burkina Faso. 5 years after Macron mocked President Kaboré in that lecture hall, everything changed. The president who once smiled through his humiliation was gone, deposed in a coup. And this time, it was Macron's turn to face humiliation. History will remember this. The era when France's influence began to crumble under President Emmanuel Macron. It was during his time that the once loyal Sahelian countries, nations that stood firmly with France for decades, cut diplomatic ties. And the ones leading this revolt? Military leaders determined to reclaim sovereignty. As President Ibrahim Traoré once said, "Burkina Faso and the AES have no problem with the French people. Our problem is with France's ideology." For too long, France has seen Africa as a subordinate, a continent unworthy of making its own decisions. In France's eyes, Africa does not deserve full sovereignty. Africa must always be helped, guided, controlled. But here's the hypocrisy. France criticizes American hegemony while doing the exact same thing in Africa. 1960 was called the Year of Independence, a new dawn for Africa, or so we thought. But decades later, the truth is clear. Africa never truly broke free. France kept its grip tight. The CFA franc, still used today by 7 of 9 francophone West African states, remains pegged to the euro, tied to French oversight. And for years, these nations paid an annual tax to France, for nothing in return. This system didn't just breed resentment, it ignited a fire that burned through the Sahel, fueling military takeovers that many saw not as coups, but as liberation from a neocolonial order. In a bid to erase this violent and unfair legacy, President Emmanuel Macron tried a different approach. In early 2023, ahead of a 4-nation African tour, Macron promised a new era in France's relationship with the continent, a partnership of equals, as he called it. He announced that French military bases in Africa would no longer be exclusively French. They would be jointly managed with local forces, and the number of French troops on the ground would be visibly reduced. This was Macron's attempt to reset the relationship, a continuation of the vision he had first presented in Ouagadougou back in 2017, when he boldly declared that his generation was not here to tell Africans what to do. And to his credit, there were signs of change. Macron increased financial aid to Africa. He began returning cultural artifacts, treasures stolen during the colonial era, to countries like Benin and Senegal, addressing wounds that had festered for decades. He reached out to civil society and Africa's youth, not just governments. He condemned leaders who massacred their own citizens. He supported ECOWAS in defending electoral politics against the rising tide of military coups. He even pledged to end the CFA franc, the France-backed currency that symbolized neocolonial control. In 2022, Macron took another unprecedented step. He flew to Rwanda. There, he apologized and publicly acknowledged France's failures during the 1994 genocide. It was a gesture the world never expected. For a moment, it seemed Macron might succeed in rewriting history. But the truth? It was already too late. But by the final months of 2023, everything began to fall apart. France's relationship with Africa, once carefully maintained, started crumbling at an alarming pace. Anti-French sentiment exploded across former colonies. In city squares, in villages, in the streets, voices grew louder. France must leave. The anger didn't come out of nowhere. It had been building for years. Back in 2013, Paris launched a military intervention in Mali to stop jihadists advancing from the north. The fighters were closing in on Bamako, threatening to topple the government. France stepped in, and the mission worked. The elected government was saved. For a moment, Paris was hailed as a hero, but that glory faded quickly. Despite France's heavy military presence afterward, the insurgency never disappeared. It grew stronger. The violence spread beyond Mali, across Burkina Faso, into Niger, and deep into the Sahel. Entire communities beneath the Sahara now lived under constant threat. By 2021, the resentment boiled over. In November that year, a convoy of French troops heading north was repeatedly blocked by angry protesters as it crossed Burkina Faso and Niger. To many Africans, these troops weren't protectors anymore, they were occupiers. And in the cities, among progressive voices and a rising generation of young Africans, the cry grew louder: end the CFA franc. This colonial relic, still pegged to the euro under French control, became a symbol of economic slavery. For them, breaking free from this currency wasn't just financial, it was liberation. One of the most defining moments in the collapse of France's influence in Africa came with a single announcement: the end of Operation Barkhane. Launched in 2014, this mission was designed to eliminate armed groups in the Sahel and stop their spread across the region. For nearly a decade, French troops patrolled the deserts, promising stability. But by late 2022, that promise had evaporated. France withdrew, a retreat that sent shockwaves across the world. This wasn't just a military decision, it was a symbol, a sign that the old order was crumbling. And it wasn't just about Mali, it was about the entire region, because something new had emerged, a force that Paris never saw coming: the coups. It started in Mali in 2020, then Burkina Faso, then Niger. One by one, pro-French governments fell like dominoes, and from their ashes, a new alliance was born: the Alliance of Sahel States, a coalition determined to uproot France's grip on the region once and for all. To understand why this happened, we have to go back to 1960, the so-called Year of Independence. African nations may have lowered the French flag, but true freedom never came. France kept its claws deep in West Africa, economically, militarily, politically. The CFA franc ensured economic dependency. Western democratic ideals were imposed on nations that never got to choose their own path. And so, resentment grew. Anger boiled. And when civilian governments, too close to France, refused to act, the military stepped in. They saw themselves as the last line of defense, the ones who could finish what independence started. Presidents were dragged from their palaces, some placed under house arrest, others thrown into prison. And the shocking part? The people cheered. Crowds flooded the streets, celebrating what they called liberation from decades of foreign control. France and ECOWAS fought back. Heavy sanctions were slapped on these coup-hit nations, borders closed, economies strangled. But instead of breaking their resolve, these punishments did the opposite. They fueled the fire. Anti-Western anger spread like wildfire, uniting the people against foreign interference. Then came the twist no one saw coming. Chad, the last stronghold of French influence in the Sahel, turned its back on Paris. The government announced it was expelling French troops, ending its defense pact with France. The message was clear: we are a sovereign nation, We will no longer tolerate France on our soil. This move could change everything. Chad, a key military ally of France for decades, now stands on the edge of joining Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. If that happens, the Alliance of Sahel States could grow stronger than ever before. And for France, it would mean total collapse in the region. Then came another humiliation, this time in the Central African Republic. Paris was stripped of a privilege it had always held. The French ambassador was no longer the dean of the diplomatic corps. For decades, this status was reserved for France. It was symbolic of their dominance. But now, gone. A press release made it clear France had lost that privilege because it never applied reciprocity in diplomacy. The expulsion of French forces from Sahelian countries isn't just about politics. It's much deeper. It's the rejection of a history soaked in violence and exploitation. A loud message that African nations will no longer accept foreign interference in their internal affairs. For decades, France controlled African economies, armies, and leaders. But today, a new slogan echoes across the continent: Dégage, French for get out. Once seen as the paternal force behind many African nations, France is now the outsider, the unwelcome guest. This isn't just a diplomatic setback, it's the symbolic end of an empire. France is being forced to confront a harsh reality. Its imperial influence is collapsing, and this wave of rejection could spark a domino effect across Africa, inspiring more nations to break free. But instead of accepting responsibility, instead of owning up to its past, France has chosen a different path, a dangerous one. It has decided to play the blame game. At the International Organization of Francophonie Summit in Tunis, November 2022, Emmanuel Macron lashed out. Faced with the crumbling walls of French influence, he pointed the finger at a new enemy, Russia. Macron accused Moscow of fueling anti-French sentiment across Africa. He condemned the presence of the Wagner Group in Mali and the Central African Republic, calling it nothing more than a plundering project. In his words, "This perception, it is fed by others. It is a political project. I am not fooled. Many influencers, including sometimes people on your sets, are paid by the Russians. We know them." He went further, claiming that rival powers were working to destroy France's reputation, discredit its language, and replace it with their own influence, all for selfish interests. But here's the truth. Regardless of who Macron blames, Russia, social media influencers, or foreign agendas, it doesn't change the outcome. France's dominance in Africa is over. The empire has fallen. The only question now is, what comes next? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth stories from across the continent.